all the gruesome stuff he did. He was he was later convicted, and it was in 1989, I believe, of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, and 14 counts of burglary, and he was sentenced to death. He spent the next 23 years on death row at San Quentin, but he died of lymphoma in 2013 at the age of 53. Now, during Ramirez's killing spree, he would use that Cecil Hotel as his sanctuary. After killing someone, he would return to the Cecil and ditch his blood-soaked clothes in the dumpster out back, then walk into the hotel either naked or in his underwear. None of which would have raised an eyebrow, since the Cecil Hotel in the 1980s was considered total chaos. His personal room was on the top floor, floor 14 of the hotel. Now, the 14th floor of the Cecil Hotel itself is said to hold a lot of paranormal activity and feelings of dread, some of which are attributed to the spirit of Ramirez himself. Reports of strange dark images lurking within the shadows have been seen. Strange and spooky noises have been heard, along with items being moved to different locations. Now, some of these activities have been linked to Ramirez and the room that he occupied during his killing spree. And next we have an interesting little piece. Our first lady killer of the evening.
And she is very interesting, to say the least.
Yes.
Her name is Lavina Fisher, and she was born in 1793 and is actually considered the first female serial killer in the history of the United States.
Oh, yes.
Now, there are a few stories that surrounds Lavina and her husband, John. The following is one of the most popular and well-known of those stories. So, Lavina is said to have a way with men, especially her husband, John. John and Lavina ran the 6 Mile House, a place for travelers that were heading in and out of Charleston to stop for a drink or a room to rest for the night. Now, Lavina loved to bring men, preferably the rich ones, into her personal parlor for tea and conversation.
Oh, la la. Mm-hmm.
Well, that tea, she poisoned it to all those unlucky men who fell for her trickery.
Oh, boy.
Well, as the poison would take hold, Lavina and John would help the suddenly weary guest to a bed in the back of the building. Now, once the guest was passed out, John would spring a lever and a trap door was sprung, and the bed, occupant and all, would fall into a pit below the house.
Oh, my goodness.
It's pretty.
What a contraption.
Crazy. No kidding. Well, if the poison in the fall didn't kill him, John would then finish him off and relieve the body of all its valuables and put the bed back and dispose of the body.
Oh, boy.
Well, unfortunately for them,
one
of their attempted victims, John Peebles, managed to escape the Fishers only because he didn't like tea. So when the Fishers weren't looking, he had dumped the tea into a nearby plant and faked being tired to get away from them and their odd behavior. Well, once shown to his room, he decided to sit in the chair to rest since he was not tired enough to go to sleep. Well, as he was sitting there, the bed collapsed. And he jumped up. I mean, I would be startled.
Oh, yes.
He jumped up and he tried to run out the door to summon help, but to his surprise and theirs, the Fishers were standing in the doorway.
Oh, boy.
Well, John slammed the door shut and jumped out the window and ran all the way to Charleston police and reported what had happened. Well, once the police began investigating, they realized there were several reports of missing travelers along that stretch of road and ended up locating the bodies of numerous victims along the side of it.
Wow.
Well, the Fishers were hauled off to the Charleston jail to await their fate. So in South Carolina at the time, married women automatically escaped the death penalty,
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Lavina had hoped for, to escape the gallows herself.
Uh-huh.
However, the judge ruined her plan by telling her that John would be hung first.
Oh, no.
Which would make her a widow and eligible to be hung.
That's how they got around that.
They did. Well, on February 18th, 1820, it is rumored that Lavina wore a wedding dress to her hanging in hopes her beauty and pitifulness of her state would cause some man within the crowd to swoon in and marry her at the last minute.
Oh, she's a murderer. Like they're going to jump at the chance to marry her.
Oh, nice try.
Oh, boy.
Well, when that didn't occur, it was said that her mood had drastically changed.
Oh, I bet.
And according to one of the historians of the time, she stamped in rage and swore with all the vehemence of her amazing vocabulary, calling down damnation.
Uh-huh.
The crowd stood shocked in silence while she cut short one curse with another and ended with a volley of shrieks.
Right.
A temper tantrum.
Yes, exactly.
Well, right before her hanging, she gave her last statement, which would ultimately remain embedded within history for all time. Well, she said, "If you have a message you want to send to hell, give it to me. I'll carry it." Then, before the hangman could pull the lever to hang her, she jumped off the scaffold and hanged herself.
Oh, my. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction.
I guess not. Well, it was almost immediately following her death that the locals began to report seeing her face floating behind the bars of the window where she was held. Then after the great earthquake in 1886, people began to report seeing her wandering around in other parts of the neighborhood, as well within the cemetery a few blocks away. Now, some visitors of the Charleston Old City Jail have claimed to encounter her ghost, along with witnessing other shadowy humanoid forms. Sounds of chains dragging, doors slamming, voices in unoccupied rooms, and objects being moved or disappearing have also been reported, but not all necessarily relate to Lavina herself.
Right.
Well, some paranormal investigators have also captured EVPs, photos, and videos that they believe to be of Lavina's ghosts.
Well, actually, I have been to that old city jail in Charleston, South Carolina. And I will tell you, we went on a ghost tour one night while we were out there. This was a couple years back. And I caught some very interesting photographs. We were all completely in the dark, and I had my night vision camera, of course.
Right.
We were in a small room, much like the room we're in right now. Okay. And you know how the night vision lights up?
Yes.
Well, what appeared behind two other guests standing in front of me was shadows that did not match the people standing there.
Wow.
They were shadows of other people. They were not the same people. Huh. It was very, very strange looking. Sure. Which brings us now to Charles Kennedy, folks. As one legend goes, in 1865, Charles moved to Monroe Valley, New Mexico, bringing with him his wife and his 3-year-old son, choosing an isolated area on the Taos Trail, which he built a small cabin for him and his family to live. Now, at this time, the trail was mainly used by lone cowboys until gold was found within the area, to which then the trail became well-traveled by miners heading in and out, hoping to make their fortunes mining for gold. Now, it was also around this time that rumors began to emerge that some of those lone travelers last seen heading on this trail never returned back home. Then, I'll tell you what, during the winter of 1871, a prominent citizen headed down the trail and was never seen or heard from again. An investigation was actually started, and the citizen's belongings, which was his horse and mules, were found on the Kennedy property. Kennedy replied to this accusation by telling them he found the animals wandering alone, and he assumed the Apaches had killed or abducted the owner. However, This was found to be suspicious because the Apaches were known to love mule meat, and they would almost never leave that animal behind. But with no concrete proof, the investigators were forced to head back into town. Now, a few weeks later, a stranger stopped near the Kennedys' cabin and at a nearby spring for a drink near the cabin. He noticed his shack, and there was an odor coming from it. Now, he saw a young boy and figured it was the owner's son, so he walked up to him and asked him if his daddy was a trapper, to which the boy told him he was not, and that smell was from an Indian that his dad had killed earlier and hadn't had time to chop up and burn yet, if you can believe that. Right? So the son is telling the traveler this. Jeez. So, unfortunately, Kennedy was standing just around the corner, and he had heard the entire conversation too quickly. He rounded the corner, and he shot the man in the head, and he grabbed his son by his feet and slammed him onto the rock chimney until he was dead.
Oh, my.
Kennedy then proceeded to drink himself into a stupor and passed out. At this point, his wife took advantage of the chance, and she ran 15 miles to the nearest town, where she burst into a saloon and told everyone what had happened. And that there were the bones of at least 20 other men on the property, and that he had also killed their 2 other children before moving to that area. Oh my gosh. The men promptly left, heading into the night to capture Charles Kennedy, okay? Now, they returned that same night with Kennedy and a big old bag of blackened bones. And Kennedy was taken to jail to await trial, but that night the men of the town decided to have a lynching party with Kennedy as the guest of honor. They took his head off with the blade of a long knife, and eventually his head was secured to a pike pole and was stuck in the southwest corner of the Lambert Saloon, where it resided for over a year. Kennedy is said to have murdered upwards of 100 men before being caught. People say Kennedy's ghost still lives on and continues to kill victims even after death. They say on dark and windy nights, the screams of those being killed can still be heard, and the smell of burning flesh permeates the air. A headless ghost has also been seen wandering in the area in search for his head. And with that, folks, we will be right back with more Ghost Talk Radio. You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting.